الذين آمنوا وتطمئن قلوبهم بذكر الله لا بذكر الله تطمئن القلوب أفضل ذكر فاعلم أنه لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا 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 الله 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 Allah, 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 la ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, la ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. لا إله إلا الله سيدنا محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم. ولهذا النبي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم. الفاتحة. You're on page 133. Or after the Fajr prayer. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألف لام ميم. ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون أولئك على هدى من ربهم وأولئك هم المفلحون. وإلهكم إله واحد لا إله إلا هو الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أقدم إليك بين يدي كل نفس ولمحة ولحظة وخطرة وطرفة يطرف بها أحد السماوات والأرض وكل شيء هو في علمك كائن أو قد كان أقدم إليك بين يدي ذلك كله. الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم. لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وإن تبدوا ما في أنفسكم أو تخفوه يحاسبكم به الله فيغفر لمن يشاء ويعذب من يشاء والله على كل شيء قدير. آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كلنا آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله لا نفرق من أحد من رسله وقالوا سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين آمين. شهد الله أنه لا إله إلا هو والملائكة وأولو العلم قائما بالقسط لا إله إلا هو العزيز الحكيم. وأنا أشهد بما شهد الله به وأشهد الله على ذلك وأستودع الله هذه الشهادة وهي لي عند الله وديعة أسأله حفظها حتى يتوفاني عليها. إن الدين عند الله الإسلام. قل اللهم مالك الملك اللهم مالك الملك تؤتي الملك من تشاء وتنزع الملك ممن تشاء وتعز من تشاء وتذل من تشاء بيدك الخير إنك على كل شيء قدير. تولج الليل في النهار وتولج النهار في الليل وتخرج الحي من الميت وتخرج الميت من الحي وترزق من تشاء بغير حساب. الرحمن الدنيا والآخرة ورحمهما تؤتي من تشاء منهما وتمنع من تشاء. أنت ترحمنا فارحمنا رحمة تغننا بها رحمة من سواك. اللهم اقضي عنا الدين وأغننا من الفقر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد ولم يلد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. I think I missed 3. Yeah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. We're going to be on page 145, the word of Sayyidina Al-Sheikh Abu Bakr bin Salam. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم يا عظيم السلطان يا قديم الإحسان يا إيمن النعم يا كثير الجود يا واسع العطاء يا خفي اللطف جميل الصنع يا حليم لا يعجل. صل يا ربي على سيدنا محمد أجمعين. اللهم لك الحمد شكرا، لك المن فضلا،
وأنت ربنا حقا،
ونحن عبيدك رقا، وأنت لم تزل لذلك أهلا. يا ميسر كل عسير، ويا جابر كل كسير، ويا مغني كل فقير، ويا مقوي كل ضعيف، ويا مأمن كل مخيف. يسر علينا كل عسير، ستيسير العسير عليك يسير. اللهم يا من لا يحتاج إلى البيان والتفسير، حاجاتنا كثير وأنت عالم بها وخبير. اللهم إني أخاف منك، وأخاف ممن يخاف منك، وأخاف ممن لا يخاف منك. اللهم بحق من يخاف منك نجنا ممن لا يخاف منك. اللهم بحق سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم احرسنا بعينك التي لا تنام، واغنفنا بكنفك الذي لا يرام، وارحمنا بقدرتك علينا فلا نهلك، وأنت ثقتنا ورجاؤنا.
صلى الله على سيدنا محمد
وآله وصحبه وسلم. والحمد لله رب العالمين عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزينة عرشه ومداد كلماته. اللهم إنا نسألك زيادة في الدين، وبركة في العمر، وصحة في الجسد، وتوبة قبل الموت، وشهادة عند الموت، ومغفرة بعد الموت، وعفوا عند الحساب، وأمانا من العذاب، ونصيبا من الجنة، وارزقنا النظر إلى وجهك الكريم. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون، وسلام على المرسلين، والحمد لله رب العالمين. عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. Where the teeth up in the Imam al-Haddad. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد، لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد، لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد، لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق، من شر ما خلق، ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب،
ومن شر النفاثات في العقد، ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق، من شر ما خلق،
ومن شر غاسق
إذا وقب، ومن شر النفاثات في العقد، ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق، من شر ما خلق، ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب، ومن شر النفاثات في العقد، ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس، ملك الناس، إله الناس، من شر الوسواس الخناس، الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
قل أعوذ برب الناس، ملك الناس، إله الناس، من شر الوسواس الخناس، الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس، ملك الناس، إله الناس، من شر الوسواس الخناس، الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين، وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون. ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين، وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون. ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين، وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون. أفحسبتم أنما خلقناكم عبثا وأنكم إلينا لا ترجعون. فتعالى الله الملك الحق، لا إله إلا هو رب العرش الكريم. ومن يدعو مع الله لا برهان له به فإنما حسابه عند ربه إنه لا يفلح الكافرون وقل رب اغفر وارحم وأنت خير الراحمين فسبحان الله حين تمسون وحين تصبحون
وله الحمد في السماوات والأرض وعشيا وحين تظهرون
يخرج الحي من الميت ويخرج الميت من الحي ويحيي الأرض بعد موتها وكذلك تخرجون أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم سلام على نوح في العالمين إنا كذلك نجزي المحسنين إنه من عبادنا المؤمنين أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم
اللهم إني
أصبحت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فأتمم نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة اللهم إني أصبحت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فأتمم نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة اللهم إني أصبحت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فأتمم نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك
وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك
إنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك
وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك
ورسولك اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك إنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت
وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك
اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك إنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك إنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه يكافي مزيدا الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه يكافي مزيدا الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه يكافي مزيدا آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت
واستمسكت بالعروة
الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت
واستمسكت بالعروة
الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله السميع عليم
آمنت بالله العظيم
وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت واستمسكت بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله السميع عليم رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا
وبسيدنا محمد
صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا رضيت بالله ربا
وبالإسلام دينا وبسيدنا محمد
صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا رضيت بالله ربا
وبالإسلام دينا وبسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا
حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم.
حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم.
حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم.
اللهم صل على
سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم إني أسألك من فجاءة الخير وأعوذ بك من فجاءة الشر. اللهم أنت ربي لا إله إلا أنت، خلقتني وأنا عبدك وأنا على عهدك ووعدك ما استطعت. أعوذ بك من شر ما صنعت. أبوء لك بنعمتك علي فاغفر لي فإنه لا يغفر الذنوب إلا أنت. اللهم أنت ربي لا إله إلا أنت، عليك توكلت وأنت رب العرش العظيم. ما شاء الله كان وما لم يشأ لم يكن، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. أعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير، وأن الله قد أحاط بكل شيء علما. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من شر نفسي ومن شر كل دابة أنت آخذ بناصيتها. إن ربي على صراط مستقيم. يا حي يا قيوم برحمتك أستغيث ومن عذابك أستجير. أصلح لي شأني كله ولا تكلني نفسي ولا إلى أحد من خلقك طرفة عين.
اللهم
إني أعوذ بك من الهم والحزن، وأعوذ بك من العجز والكسل، وأعوذ بك من الجبن والبخل، وأعوذ بك من غلبة الدين وقهر الرجال. اللهم إني أسألك العافية في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أسألك العفو والعافية والمعافاة الدائمة في ديني ودنياي وأهلي ومالي. اللهم استر عوراتي وآمن روعاتي. اللهم احفظني من بين يدي ومن خلفي وعن يميني وعن شمالي ومن فوقي، وأعوذ بعظمتك أن أغتال من تحتي. اللهم أنت خلقتني وأنت تهديني، وأنت تطعمني وأنت تسقيني، وأنت تميتني وأنت تحييني، وأنت على كل شيء قدير. أصبحنا على فطرة الإسلام وعلى كلمة الإخلاص وعلى دين نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم، وعلى ملة أبينا إبراهيم حنيفا مسلما وما كان من المشركين. اللهم بك أصبحنا وبك أمسينا وبك نحيا وبك نموت وعليك نتوكل. نشور أصبحنا وأصبح الملك لله والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم إني أسألك خير هذا اليوم، فتحه ونصره ونوره وبركته وهداه. اللهم إني أسألك خير هذا اليوم
وخير ما فيه وخير ما قبله وخير ما بعده،
وأعوذ
بك من شر هذا اليوم وشر ما فيه
وشر ما قبله
وشر ما بعده. اللهم ما أصبح بي من نعمة أو بأحد من خلقك
فمنك وحدك لا
شريك لك، فلك الحمد ولك الشكر على ذلك. سبحان الله وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه نفسي
وزنة عرشي ومداد
كلماتي سبحان الله وبحمده عدد خلقي ورضا نفسي وزنة عرشي ومداد كلماتي سبحان الله وبحمده عدد خلقي
ورضا نفسي
وزنة عرشي ومداد كلماتي سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقي ورضا نفسي
وزنة عرشي ومداد كلماتي
سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقي ورضا نفسي وزنة عرشي ومداد كلماتي سبحان الله سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقي ورضا نفسي
وزنة عرشي ومداد كلماتي
سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقي ورضا نفسي وزنة عرشي ومداد كلماتي سبحان الله عدد ما خلق في السماء سبحان الله عدد ما خلق في الأرض
سبحان الله عدد ما بين ذلك
سبحان الله عدد ما هو خالق الحمد لله عدد ما خلق في السماء الحمد لله عدد ما خلق في الأرض
الحمد لله عدد ما بين ذلك
لك الحمد لله عدد ما هو خالق لا إله إلا الله عدد ما خلق في السماء لا إله إلا الله عدد ما خلق في الأرض لا إله إلا الله عدد ما بين ذلك لا إله إلا الله عدد ما هو خالق الله أكبر عدد ما خلق في السماء الله أكبر عدد ما خلق في الأرض الله أكبر عدد ما بين ذلك الله أكبر عدد ما هو خالق لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما خلق في السماء لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما خلق في الأرض لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما بين ذلك لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما هو خالق لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في علم الله صلاة وسلاما دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في علم الله صلاة وسلاما دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في علم الله صلاة وسلاما دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة في كل لحظة درجات في الجنة وكثرة ثبات من ذات حسنات غير من جهنم ينفع بهم وإلى علينا من بركاتهم ومغفرتهم في الدين والدنيا والآخرة وإلى حضرة النبي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم الفاتحة. بسم الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين. فصل شروط الصلاة الثمانية: طهارة الحدثين وطهارة عن النجاسة في الثوب والبدن والمكان وستر العورة. كاستقبال القبلة ودخول الوقت والعلم بفرضيتها وألا يعتقد فرضا من فروضها سنة واجتناب المبطلات.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه والتابعين لهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وعلينا معهم فيهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. نوينا التعلم والتعليم. We intend to learn and teach. وَالنَّفْعُ وَالْإِنْتِفَاعُ. We intend to give and take benefit. وَالتَّذْكِيرُ وَالْمُذَاكَرَةُ. We intend to remind others and ourselves remember. وَالْإِفَادَةُ وَالْإِسْتِفَادَةُ. We intend to profit mutually. وَالْحَثَّ عَلَى التَّمَسُّكِ بِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ وَبِسُنَّةِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. We intend to encourage adherence to, holding fast to Allah's book and the Sunnah of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi wa sallam. We intend to call to guidance and lead to all good, seeking in that Allah's countenance, pleasure, nearness, and reward. We intend what the author intends, as well as our sheikhs and the pious, what Allah knows of good intentions. We ask Allah to aid us in acting, in learning and acting upon what we've learned, in lutf and afiyah, and teaching it. To proceed, alhamdulillah, we are reading at a different place mark in the same book that we had been reading on Thursdays, because that student finished, or those students finished their place mark, or just about did. So we are in chapters of Salah, sections of Salah. So he says, Faslun, Shurutu Salati Thamaniyatun. Shurutu as-Salati Thamaniya. So shurut is the plural of shart. And shart in lugha, in the language, is ta'liqu amrin bi amrin kullun minhuma mustaqbalun. Connecting one matter or basing one matter upon another, each of them in the future. And a simple definition of a condition, or translates as a condition. So you would translate this simply as the preconditions of Salah are 8. There are 8 preconditions. And shurut as-Salah are obligations. The conditions of Salah are obligations. Just like the integrals of Salah, the obligatory integral elements are obligations. The shurut are obligations. The difference between a shart and an integral is a shart is external and an integral is internal, meaning it's a component of the thing. Whereas the shuruts are not components of Salah itself, they're obligations that are other than Salah, but they must be combined with it, must exist throughout it. And then, so they're both obligatory. Shuruts are obligatory, and I'm emphasizing that because most Muslims that haven't spent some time studying law will be ignorant of at least some of the conditions and their details. And Imam al-Ghazali, he said this in what Imam al-Haddad quotes in the Complete Summons. He said that in his time, and that was 5th century, most of the people in the towns were ignorant of the shurut of Salah, much less the people that were nomads. He said the Atrak and the Kurds. He said the Turks and the Kurds. And Turks were nomads, right? They lived in tents at a certain point. So what about people in towns are ignorant of it? Then what about those who are further? And edutainment will not teach you shurut al-Salah generally. You know, people want to talk about ijtihad and maqasid sharia and urf, all of these great topics that are for kibar of the that are for like high level scholarship. And then you ask them, like, what are the shurut of this, or what are the shurut of that? And they don't know. I remember I was sitting with a group preparing them for Ramadan, doing a Ramadan prep course. And we asked either a shart of Sawm or specifically how Niyyah needed to be made in the school that this people, most of them were from the region that school is practiced. And nobody knew, right? Nobody knew. So basics, we may be ignorant of them at times. And those of us that learn are obliged to teach. So one of the obligations for people to pray valid prayers is that they must know and properly perform the preconditions of the prayer. So a simple definition of shart here is what must precede a thing, what is obliged, what we are obliged to precede our salah with, and it must persist throughout our salah. So what does that mean? That means, or if we say it another way, as he said, shurut as-salah thamaniya, if we were to say the preconditions for the sihha of salah. Shurutu sihhat as-salah thamaniya. The conditions for the sihha of salah, for the validity of salah, are 8. What does that mean? That means that if one of these is absent, the prayer is invalid. That's what that means. Shurutu sihhat as-salah means that if one of these 8 is absent, the salah is invalid. What does invalid mean? Invalid means that you have to do it again. It didn't count. The obligation has not been fulfilled. If the time is still in, you have to repeat it. If the time is out, you have to make it up. Right? That's what that means. So if we don't get these, our salah is like what the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith of the one who incorrectly prays, Irja' fasalli fa innaka lam tusalli. He told him, go back and pray because you didn't just pray. And then the man did that a couple times, and then he said, teach me how to pray. Allimni ya Rasulullah. And the Prophet ﷺ explained. And in his explanation, he includes some of the shurut. Right? He includes some of the shurut in his explanation in some of the transmissions of that hadith. So these are shurut sihhat as-salah. That differs from shurut al-wujub. He lists 6 of them here. Essentially, those are al-Islam, al-taklif, and al-tahara, or al-naqa, and al-hayd wal-nifas. That's how you understand those. And then, so the first of them, he says, tahara to al-hadathain, purity from the 2 states of ritual impurity. Or you could say being free from the 2 states of ritual impurity. All right, so you have ritual purity and physical purity, bodily purity. Here he's talking about ritual purity. So he says you have to be free from the 2 states of ritual impurity. And there are 2 states, minor ritual impurity or major ritual impurity. Minor ritual impurity, and he has an independent chapter where he defines this, is what requires wudu. Major ritual impurity is what requires ghusl. So you have to be free from both of those. If you possess water or earth, right, you have to do the necessary purification from both of those, with water or earth when it is allowed, as we saw in the chapter of dry ablution of tayammum. And then one prays, right? If someone lacks both water and earth, one prays anyway due to the sanctity of the time, and then has to make it up, right? So one has to, and that is why there's a whole chapter of tahara, right? That is why there is a whole chapter of purity, to teach one how to free oneself from these two states, and also how to bodily purify themselves, which is the next condition. So one has to make wudu and one has to do ghusl. And those are easy if one's taught properly. One can do them, though I know Muslims that went years not knowing how to do those. So one should learn that in a text of law, how to do it. And then in addition to that, there's inward meanings of purification that one should continue to work on. La ilaha illallah. And then the second condition is at-tahara an al-najasa fi al-thawbi wal-badani wal-makan. Being pure from filth. And the word I'm translating as filth is an-najasa. In one's garment, body, and place of prayer. So this is physically being pure. And najasa are things like human excretions, blood, improperly slaughtered dead animals, or those that can't be slaughtered, like inedible animals, and so on. So one has to be pure from them. That is called tahara an najasa. And a common error or a common misunderstanding among Muslims is the difference between a tahara an najasa and a tahara an al-hadathain. The difference between ritual purity and bodily purity, we could say, physical purity. Because people will ask, if I touch a dog, do I have to make wudu? And the misunderstanding there is, does physical filth affect your ritual purity? And the answer is it doesn't. This is an extreme example, but you could swim in a lake of blood. Not that you would do that, but you could, and it wouldn't affect your wudu. But you'd have to purify your body before praying. Right? So this is the second. This is purifying your garment, your body, and your place of prayer. So what does this condition mean? Being pure from filth that is not excused. So we understand from that some filth is excused. And really the lengthy discussion in al-najasat is on al-ma'fuat. Right? That's the lengthy discussion. When there's an independent treatise about al-najasa, it's going to be about al-ma'fuat, the many things that are excused. The early mukhtasarat do not discuss that. But lengthier works discuss the many, many things that are excused. And otherwise you couldn't live. And you'll have people feeling like they have microscopic najasa surrounding them. They have a cage of najasa and they become, they start having waswasa about it. Some people, they can't purify themselves in less than like a half hour or an hour or two. It becomes a sickness. And that's due to ignorance of al-ma'fuat as well as other things. People become like obsessive compulsive about it. They can. And if it's real OCD, it has to be treated. But some knowledge can treat what's not really a sickness. And so purity from al-ma'fuat. And there's a maxim, and this is in Imam Ramli's works, that everything that's difficult to avoid is excused. Everything that's difficult to avoid is excused. Extremely difficult. Right? So an example is some amount of blood is excused in the garment or body of a person who's praying. And a lot can be with conditions. The companions might make salah and be wounded and have a wound that was bleeding from high up on their body down to their feet, and that is excused, at least in the view of the Shafi'i jurists. And there are other things that are excused, alhamdulillah. So one has to be pure from those things that are not excused, which is very easy. It's very easy to do, alhamdulillah, because if anything is unavoidably difficult, prohibitively difficult, it is excused by definition. So he says, in the garments of the person who is praying. How do we define garment here? Everything he or she is carrying. So this ring, for example, that's a garment in salah. A pin in my pocket, that would be defined as a garment because I'm carrying it. So all of that has to be pure. Well, badan, and in the body, right? And that's obvious. The body has to be pure. So that means people need to know how to clean their bodies properly. They have to have proper hygiene for the prayer, which entails knowing how to do istinja properly, right? Knowing how to do istinja properly. And that's how we get into these subtleties. So someone, for example, that believes they're doing istinja just with what has become popular of people having these adult wet wipes, that doesn't purify you. That might remove ayn najasa and wasfu. That might remove the substance that is impure and its attributes, but it doesn't purify. Purification entails water running over a thing, or that a dry substance is used and that's not dry with the conditions that we saw, right? So that's one that we have to work on. La ilaha illallah. And then al-makan is the place of prayer, which means what? The place of prayer means what is touching the body of the person who is praying, or his garments, as defined previously. So if someone were praying, for example, and when they prostrate, their hand touches something impure, a dead insect, for example, that would invalidate the prayer. If that same insect were in front of them, but so that they didn't touch it, it was just, say, right under their stomach while they were prostrating without touching it, their prayer would still be valid because it's not touching their body or anything that they are carrying. However, that is makruh. To pray adjacent to najasa is makruh. For that reason, it's makruh to pray in graveyards. That's the illah of karaha in graveyards. Yes, sir.
Sheikh, I know you mentioned previously that like common walkways where like najasa is unavoidable or is excused. But would a person be able to pray there?
Even if so there's a question, a common walkway, something that a walkway that wouldn't typically be purified, like a road, a street, that's excused when you walk over it. But it wouldn't be excused if you fell, because that's unusual. And the same, praying on it is unusual. Yeah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. Muhammad Rasulullah. And then understand that from the body is the eye, the mouth, and the nose. So the mouth and the nose and the eye are considered outward with respect to najasa, or external with respect to najasa, internal with respect to wudu. You're not obliged to wash them in wudu, sunnah for the mouth and nose, but you are obliged to rinse them from najasa. So if your gums bleed, you have to spit it out and rinse your mouth before you pray, unless you're someone for whom it's excused because it's chronic. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Naam. And then satrul awra, covering of the nakedness. Al-awra means nakedness, what you're ashamed to expose. And a more specific Shari'i definition is what you're obliged to cover and forbidden to look at. So you're obliged to cover it from yourself, forbidden to look at it from others. He has an independent chapter of the awra in different contexts. And in the context of prayer, the awra, the nakedness of a man, is between his navel and his knees. And he has to cover at least part of those. Though he should cover all of them, because for people to look at them is a problem. Right? So essentially he's covering from his navel, including it, and his knees. Right? Though if some of the knee were exposed without any of the thigh, it wouldn't invalidate the salah, but if someone saw it, it'd be forbidden from that point of view. Right? So the man has to cover from his navel to his knees, from his belly button to his knees is the awra of a man in salah. He has to cover that. A woman, her awra is everything except her hands and face. Her hands to her wrist and her face must be covered in salah. It must be covered from the sides and above, not from beneath. So from beneath, that's okay, but the sides and above, it must be covered. It must be covered with something that surrounds them and prevents you seeing their complexion beneath it at a distance you would normally sit to speak to someone. For someone with average sight, right? So if someone prays, a man prays, for example, and he has a rip in his pants that exposes his thigh, that's invalid, and it has to be made up in the Shafi'i school. Even if for past actions, the Maliki school would carry that after the prayer's gone out. In the Shafi'i school, he'd have to make that up. Same thing if a man wears shorts and they ride up, for example, sitting between the two prostrations, when his knees are bent, it pulls up and some of his thighs are exposed. That's invalid. And the same if some of the awra of a woman is exposed. La ilaha illallah. What about tight clothing that shows the shape of the body, the shape of the awra beneath? That counts for salah with karaha. The prayer is still valid, but it's makruh. It's makruh, and it could be muharram. And there's a threat in the hadith for that. Right? So it's not something someone wants to do, but from the point of view of salah, it's valid. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. What about someone who doesn't find a covering? Someone who doesn't find a covering prays uncovered and they don't have to make it up. Right? Like someone who's in prison, for example, being mistreated, God forbid, and they're not given proper clothes. They pray as they are. They pray as they are, and they don't have to make it up. Facing the Qibla. What's Tiqbalul Qibla? Facing the Qibla. And the Qibla is the Kaaba itself. And it is to be faced with the chest. La ilaha illallah. Sayyidina Muhammad. And the Qibla is known various ways. By seeing it, by seeing a mihrab to which Prophet Muhammad ﷺ prayed, by ijtihad, right, by endeavoring to work it out. And compasses are a degree between the mihrabs that are, and also the direction of prayer is known by seeing a reliable mihrab. And in longer books, they discuss the conditions of that. That the direction of prayer can be known by that. And obviously that's lower than the mihrabs to which the Prophet ﷺ prayed. higher than ijtihad, and they treat a compass like between a reliable. They treat it similar to a reliable mihrab. They treat it similar to that. It's higher than ijtihad, and Allah knows best. Yes, sir.
In terms of using a compass, like, is there any? Would we just basically follow, like look in our area, look at what the degree of prayer is?
Mm-hmm. So Hisab. Follow the calculation, and in this is one of the exceptions where calculations are used in the Sharia. Yeah. And actually, Muslims developed spherical trigonometry for this. Spherical trigonometry, trigonometry on a sphere, that was developed by the Muslims. And they did very accurate calculations of the Qibla by that. There are exceptions to facing the Qibla. An exception is when you're doing a voluntary prayer on a permissible journey and praying on your vehicle or while walking. You only have to face on a vehicle the Qibla when doing takbir of ihram, if you're able, if it's easy. Like if you're traveling roughly the direction of the Qibla and you can turn a little bit for takbir and turn back, the soundest position in the Shafi'i school is you have to. And if, for example, you're traveling in the opposite direction where it's very difficult to turn around, you don't have to. And some schools don't even give that condition. And in the Shafi'i school, there's a second position that you don't have to. Another is the prayer of extreme fear, right? The prayer of shiddat khawf. So people that are praying in an active emergency. The example they mean is like if someone's really fighting and they have to start praying. They're praying and they have to start fighting. Another example they give is they're praying in a dry riverbed and a flood comes and they have to move. That's called the prayer of extreme danger, and you could pray in with facing whatever way, and the movements that are necessary to avoid that danger. Those are excused. It's called Salat Shiddat al-Khawf, as opposed to Salat al-Khawf, where you have various groups coming in and out of the prayer, and the other groups watching them, or two groups, one praying for part of it, then ending, and then the other joining, and so on. And that's treated as an independent chapter. But this is Salat Shiddat Khawf, when it's just too intense for that. There's an imminent danger that has to be avoided. One can actually pray with movements and not facing the Qibla. And that happened in the case of a Sahabi who he assassinated someone and came out and started doing Salah as he walked away. Sahaba were hardcore, man. Radiallahu anhum. Hit him. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. No, so like, say we're praying and so active shooter runs in, everybody's sutra. Keep doing salah. You don't have to break salah, right? You could still be praying and dealing with him. Yep. And may Allah protect us from that. And obviously, in times like that, one can leave some people that are securing the situation while the rest pray. But when needed, someone can pray in that extreme danger. Someone's in a house and it catches fire. They can pray, and while they're exiting, continue the prayer. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So what would that salah look like? So let's say they're in their qiyam and they finish Fatiha.
Ima. It would look like motioning for the bow, but not a complete bow.
No.
Ima, or imagining some of the movements. Yep. Words with modified movements. La ilaha illallah. And then one more is someone who is not able to face the Qibla, for example, because they're sick and there's no one that can face them in the proper direction in their bed. And may Allah protect us from that. And in the section of integrals, we'll deal with how someone who's laying down either on their side or their back faces the Qibla. And that person prays however they can, and they have to repeat it. The next condition is the time entering, the entrance of the prayer's time. Dukhul al-waqt. Now, that's obvious if it's a prayer with the time. How do we know the time is entered? Various degrees. The first is yaqeen. You know it by certainty. Next is dhan, right? You're confident based on ijtihad. And between those two, there's actually levels. You can also be informed by someone who had knowledge, and so on, right? There's about 7 levels that can be fleshed out. 2 of those are treated in the longer works. But the point is, you can't just pray without any figuring, and even if it happens to be on time, it's invalid. You have to either have knowledge, certain knowledge that it's on time. How would you have that? You saw the sunset, or you know how to measure the shadow, or you see the light of dawn, or you see the disappearance of the glow on the horizon for Isha. So if you witness that, that's knowledge. Lower than that is ijtihad, and that based on knowing a sign. And then there's also other levels, like being informed by someone who had knowledge, like following someone who did ijtihad when you're unable to yourself. But the point is, there has to be either ilm or dhan, right? There has to be either knowledge or confidence. And again, these are some of the subtleties where people will make errors. So Qibla and time, you'll encounter those who, they say, when I'm out and, do I have to know the time? Do I have to know the direction? Ad-dinu yusr. The religion is easy. And what do they say? There's a verse about facing. It's not righteousness to face the east or the west. Various errors, but you have to know the time or have worked at it. And a prayer schedule that is calibrated is sufficient. Prayer schedules can not be entirely accurate. So pushing those to their seconds and minute limit, if you haven't checked it, and by knowing how to check it, it's not advisable. So, for example, I have a friend who was traveling in the Caribbean, and when his app said it was Maghrib, the sun was halfway down, which would make sense if you were calculating it like it was a point, right? But with the fuqaha, that's not valid. The sun has to be all the way beneath the horizon. So that's an example. Also, that's so giving it a little bit of time, like 5 minutes or so for Maghrib and a few minutes for other prayers is advised. Yes, sir.
Sheikh, in terms of the Qibla, is it right on, or is there...
It's right on. Yeah. It's the ayn. It's the ayn, not the jiha in our school. On the relied upon position. Other schools say the direction. Qibla is in that direction. If you can do the ayn. And at great distance, it's closer to semantics. Because even a wide prayer row, like a wide prayer row, say in the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, which is wider than the Qibla, than the Kaaba itself. So some of those people are not facing right at it. If the mihrab was right on, the extremes of either row would be off. So they say istiqbal urfan. And if you were off by half of a degree at this distance, how many miles, hundreds of miles would you be from the Qibla, right? So it's urf, but you have to do your best. وأن لا يعتقد فردا من فروضها. Wait, first العلم بفرضيتها, knowing that it is an obligation in obligatory prayers, right? You have to know that it is an obligation. And that the person not believe that one of its obligations is a sunnah, with the same meaning that we had in the shurut of wudu. Either they believe everything is an obligation, or either they differentiate between these are 17 integrals of salah, or 13 on the Qol where they're 13, and the 2 ma'neen is a shart. So it's either 17 or 13 obligations, integrals, and it's a semantic difference between the two. Or it's all obligatory. Or they know their obligations and sunnahs, but they don't perform a given obligation thinking it's a sunnah. And this third case is valid from someone who hasn't studied with Imam Ramli, and invalid from someone who has studied, whereas Ibn Hajar doesn't differentiate. And that's the upshot of that. And then he said, avoiding those things that invalidate the salah, which are an independent chapter, like talk, like motion, and so on. And Allah knows best. So shurut must be fulfilled prior to salah and exist throughout. If one of them is ceases to be present, like purity, the salah is rendered invalid, and the condition must be corrected, and the salah repeated. Otherwise, it didn't count. As one of our teachers said, you're shooting blanks. Salah without conditions is shooting blanks, and we seek refuge in Allah from that. Is it impermissible, makruh, to pray at graveyards or to make salah at graveyards, or both? So I don't understand the difference between praying and making salah in this. Makruh, makruh is spelled, I would spell it makruh, makruh, from kariha, yakrahu, karahatan, with kaf, ra, ha. So makruh, the end of it's a ha. And that means legally hated or disliked. You're rewarded for avoiding it, though not punished for doing it. An obligation or a forbidden thing, you're rewarded for avoiding it and punished for doing it. We seek refuge in Allah from that. Makruh is not punishable, but there is reward in avoiding it, and it is a light prohibition. So graveyards, it is makruh to pray in graveyards where, it is makruh to pray in graveyards where they don't redig the graves. It's makruh to pray in graveyards where they do not redig the graves. Where they redig the graves, it is forbidden, if you know that, and there's not a barrier between you and the earth, because the earth is impure because it's mixed with decomposed bodies. And we seek refuge in Allah from praying in that place, and we will all be in the earth. May Allah make it a good time, inshallah ta'ala. That's what this body is going to do, is return to earth. So to pray in graveyards is makruh from that point of view. To pray on a grave or to a grave with intentionally facing it is muharram, right? to take it as deliberately a place of prayer, as if one is worshiping in that place as a grave, praying on it or to it, that is muharram. But just praying in a graveyard, not focusing on this grave or that grave, but you're just there, and thus you're close to impurities, that is makruh. No, when we're talking about salah here. Salah is makruh in a graveyard that has not been redug because of the proximity to najasa. Dua is recommended. Dua is recommended in a graveyard and elsewhere. And yeah, that's recommended. The Prophet ﷺ would regularly visit Baqiyah, and he would pray for his companions. Sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Sayyidatuna Salama said whenever he would spend the night with her, he would visit Baqiyah. So at least every 9 nights he would go to Baqiyah and pray for his companions. Radiyallahu anhum wa ardahum. And in a hadith, even if there's some issue with the chain, Sayyidatuna Aisha describes him on Laylat Nisf Sha'ban, and he went to Al-Baqiyah and made dua for his companions. Radiyallahu anhum. So that is sunnah, that's excellent. The sister asked, do women have to wear socks or feet coverings during salah? So that is an area of scholastic difference of opinion among scholars. The view of the book, the view of the scholars in the school that this book is authored in, that being the Shafi'i school, her whole foot has to be covered, top and bottom. In the Maliki school, the bottom of the foot doesn't have to be covered. In the Hanafi school, if I understand it correctly, she has up to her ankle bone can be uncovered. So that's an area of scholastic difference. And if we say the top or all of the foot must be covered, that could be by socks, for instance. That could be by a long garment that was dragged so that it draped around the woman's foot. And that is how the garments were in the Prophet ﷺ's time. They would drag their garments, the ladies, to cover their feet. And countries where there are specific prayer garments, that's how they will typically be tailored. They'll be longer, like the skirt or the qamis will be long enough to kind of drag down on the floor, and thus the woman's feet are covered while she is praying. And as we'll see in the invalidators, if motion or wind or something briefly uncovers something and it's immediately covered, the prayer is still valid. So, for example, if she had a long prayer garment, prayer skirt, and one of her feet began to peek out as she went into sujood, and she were to just quickly cover it immediately, that would not invalidate the salah. And I think we got the questions I see. And wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everyone. And good morning to all of the dear brothers and sisters. May Allah bless everyone. Take them by the hand. Protect them from devils of mankind and jinn, devils of Democrats and Republicans. Waliyadu billah ta'ala, from all harm, inshallah ta'ala. From all types of inward and outward harm, inshallah ta'ala. I'm more worried about the harm of Lady Gaga than I am about militias for the Muslims, to be honest. I'm more worried about that. We need to make dawah to the militias. They're going to be down and out. They're the underdogs now. You need to make dawah to some straight white supremacists, man. I know how you feel, man. I don't like them faggots either. Right? Ooh, I said it, stuff. Right? I know how you feel, man. Ammo's all expensive now. It's not free. Seriously, especially our white Muslims.
Right.
Rather than having an army of Tobis from colonized countries, go make dawah to your people. Right now, they're down. We agree with you about many things. Come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Come to the truth. Inshallah, we won't rush to have iftar with Lady Gaga. Inshallah ta'ala, Allah protect us from that. Seek refuge in Allah. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.